What a gorgeous day it is. Absolutely freezing, but beautiful. Stunning morning. Happy Friday, folks. Now, given that it's Friday, sorry, the dogs somewhere, there they come. They have so much fun together, those two. Right, now given that it is a Friday, I thought I'd answer this question that cropped up a week or so ago, I think after the US Grand Prix, by quite a few people actually, and it was even raised in the in wider F1 circles. Ross Brawn has said that he's considering looking at this kind of thing, and it was when we had the Friday running in the USA completely curtailed by bad weather, which meant that hardly anybody got any meaningful running, and therefore were very limited in the amount of data they could collect on a Friday. And then, of course, we went onto the Sunday to have a pretty spectacular race, didn't we? And lots of people kind of put two and two together and said, well, look, was the great race as a result of not having any Friday running, and therefore should we consider not having Friday running in the future, limiting the amount of data that teams can collect, and will it therefore spice up the racing? Well, the first thing for me that you've got to consider in these situations is that we should never be making knee-jerk reactions to anything in Formula One. If you look back over history, we've had so many knee-jerk reactions in this sport, and historically they just haven't worked out. You've got to think about the consequences of any decision or any change that you make. Now, you guys know that from a number of my previous videos, I am not averse to change. In fact, I embrace it. I think it's something that should be constantly explored, but it's got to be explored with a real kind of view to whether or not it's going to actually improve things. And that means not just in the short term, it means in the long term as well. And to do that, you've really got to kind of engage all of the stakeholders, and probably the most important when it comes to things like this are the teams, because if you change the rules, if you change any part of the rule set, the teams will immediately go away and find out how on earth they can get around that change in rules. What can they come up with, to still find a competitive advantage, even though the rules have tried to peg them back a little bit? Then you've got to think about everybody else that's going to be affected. So you've got to think about the circuits. If you banned Friday running, for example, and made it a 2-day race weekend, well, then the circuits have got one less day of ticket sales, if you like, one less opportunity to generate revenue from a Formula One weekend. The TV companies have got less programming than they can make. And yes, of course, you can argue that very few people watch practice sessions, but when they've all bought their TV rights, that was part of the package. That was part of what they've paid for. So, and of course, those TV contracts all end at different times. So, for example, Sky in the UK have got a contract, for the next, 7 years or 6 years, or whatever it is now. There might be others whose contracts come up at the end of this year, but at what point are you going to make that change? Because if you make it some point within the next 6 or 7 years, it will affect some of the current TV rights holders. Sponsors, in the same kind of argument, will have less opportunity to get their brands on television, less opportunity to expose themselves to the world of the Formula One fans and TV viewership. All has an impact. Fans, is that one less opportunity that fans will get to see the cars on a track. And whilst you can argue that it's maybe not the most exciting part of a race weekend, you still find an awful lot of people turning up in the grandstands on a Friday at some racetracks, and you still get a substantial number of people tuning in on television, a number of different press outlets writing about it, reporting on it. There's a huge amount of column inches and media generated by every part of a Formula One weekend. So every single part of that has to be considered if you're going to think about making a substantial change, like getting rid of Friday practices. Now, of course, if you want to predict or know what the teams are going to do in this kind of situation, you've got to think like a team. You've got to ask the teams, but as the rule makers, you've got to think like a team as well. And that's exactly where Ross Brawn should really have his strengths. He's poacher turned gamekeeper, isn't he? So he knows how a team thinks, and that's exactly what you've got to do. You've got to start looking at it and saying, okay, if we're going to take away the Friday running, if we're going to take away all of that data collection that happens on the practice sessions of a Friday morning and Friday afternoon, I can't keep a straight face. Oh, I couldn't do it. I couldn't keep a straight face. What do you look like?
No one's going to get that whole bit.
Leo, come back.
Wait. What's up, guys? Everyone else. Alright, I'm done. No one's going to understand. I've ruined this whole recording now.
I don't really know what just happened there. So that was Leo, if you didn't recognise him with that cunning disguise on, delivering my tea in unique fashion. As I was saying, Ross Brawn is perfectly placed in his new role, running the sporting side of Formula One, to know how a team thinks. And if you're going to take away the practice sessions on a Friday, you're taking away a huge amount of data collection. An understanding of how the car is performing and how it's working on the tyres in those conditions on that particular racetrack. So if you're a team and that suddenly is taken away from you, you've got to find another way to achieve the same thing, because you still want that information to make your car work as well as it can, to go as quickly as it can, and to perform as best it can. So you still need that information. So how are you going to get it? Well, if you can't get it in the real world, on real world track testing, just like when we got rid of the whole testing program that every team used to have, well, then it all turns towards the virtual world, doesn't it? It turns towards CFD testing, wind tunnel testing, and all of the other simulation tools that teams have. Now, those things cost money, and the teams that have the most money, the biggest resource, will have the advantage of being able to run more simulations, faster simulations, more detailed simulations, having more people analyse that data back at the base in the UK or wherever their factory might be, and being able to transfer that data in the fastest possible fashion to the racetrack. Essentially, money is going to buy you performance. Now, I know that's what happens right now, but if we're looking to change rules, to spice up the racing, to mix up the playing field and level it out somehow, well, unfortunately, just simply taking away Friday running, I don't see that it's going to have that simple effect. All right, in the States and in Mexico, maybe we had a little bit of that effect come into play. It certainly wasn't the only reason we had interesting races, but the way Formula One is set up right now, it's set up, and the teams are set up, because in a way that utilises Friday practice running. If you take that away, the teams will change the way that they are set up. They'll change their whole infrastructure to suit the regulations as they are once you've made that change. So it won't have the same effect of catching people out, because they won't be caught out. They'll be geared up for exactly that situation. So for me, the people that are saying let's get rid of Friday practice for that reason, I'm not sure it's the answer. Now, I'm not saying let's not get rid of Friday practice. There is a whole other argument to say that actually a 2-day Formula One weekend may end up being the way to go. Maybe that's a better way to approach things. But it's not just as simple as taking away the practice sessions and expecting everything to be jumbled up in a mixed up grid and therefore great racing. It needs a little bit more thought than that.